Good morning, students. Welcome back to another Waidsum Academy video. Today we'll be doing IGCSE Biology, Chapter 16, Reproduction in Plants. In this chapter, we will learn about asexual reproduction, the advantages and disadvantages of asexual reproduction. We'll also learn about selective reproduction and sexual reproduction and everything and parts of a flower. Everything that concerns the plant, the system of a plant, how does a plant reproduce, and we'll learn about the steps in this video. So let's begin. So in this section 16.1, we're going to learn about asexual reproduction. What is asexual reproduction? Asexual reproduction is a process resulting in the production of genetically identical offspring from one parent. So they do not need the fusion of gametes or reproductive cells. In human beings, you need reproductive cell to produce a child, but plants can do this using only one parent, and this process is considered asexual reproduction. So asexual reproduction does not involve sex cells or fertilization. In fact, asexual reproduction involves mitosis, and mitosis is a form of nuclear division in which a parent cell divides into produce two genetically identical daughter cells. Each daughter cell has the number of chromosomes as the parent nucleus. So mitosis is basically they do not need sex cells. Instead, they have one parent cell, and this one parent cell divides itself into two daughter cells. So here is considered the parent cell, and these are considered the daughter cells. The offspring produced asexually are therefore genetically identical to the parent, and they are considered clones. This is true because since there's only one parent, there is no variation or different types of traits. They're exactly the same as the parent. So it's basically like you could think of it as cloning, where the child plant looks exactly like the parent plant. So in asexual reproduction, only one parent is required. So there's no fusion of gametes and no mixing of genetic information. That means that the plant cell only needs one cell. It doesn't need sex cells, and there is no lack of genetic information because the new plants look exactly like the parent plants. They are like clones. So what are some examples of asexual reproductions? Examples of asexual reproduction in plants are by tubers, ribosomes, and runners. Like example is this image. This is a stem tuber. A stem tuber is the swollen end of an underground stem. So when the underground stem, some plants, they grow underground and not on top, like carrots and potatoes. In this potato, you can see the stem is beneath the ground. It's underground. So it's in the same direction as the roots. Now it is in both potatoes, the end of each stem, they are considered tubers. Now, as I said, during favorable seasons, the buds will use up the food stored in the tuber to grow into new plants, and there will be as many new plants as there are the buds. So what they're trying to explain is, in some tubers, they store food, and during the time where the season is like favorable, like spring season, the buds will use the food stored in the tubers to create new plants. This is an example of asexual reproduction. If you notice, it does not need any gametes or reproductive cells. Instead, it takes the food stored in the tubers and it uses it to make a new plant during favorable seasons. Some plants develop underground food that stores organs that will develop into next year plants. They can take in their different forms such as buds or tubers. Another example of asexual reproduction are rhizomes. A rhizome is an underground storage stem. It bears scale leaves and buds, and each bud can grow into a new plant. So if you could see here in a rhizome, this is a ginger. This is a ginger. The ginger is actually considered the roots. Not really, actually. It's like the underground part. It's considered an storage stem. It's underground. You can see the plants. You can see the roots. These small strings are the roots. Here are the new plant and the stem, and you can see this entire ginger is considered a storage stem, an underground storage stem. Now each bud can grow into a new plant. So you see these small parts of the storage stem, there are buds. And when the buds like split away from the storage stem, they can grow into new plants. And this is also another example of asexual reproduction. The last example is a runner. A runner is a slender shoot that arises from a bud in the parent plant. It grows horizontally over the surface of the soil, and the buds develop along its length. Each bud develops roots and leaves, and it becomes a new plant. So some plants grow side shoots and called runners that contain tiny plantlets on them. So it grows horizontally on the surface of the soil, and the buds develop on its along its length. So as it's growing, new plants can grow around the stem, and each bud develops roots and leaves, and this causes it to become a new plant. This process shows of another example of asexual reproduction. Now we need to understand what are the advantages and disadvantages of asexual reproduction. Why is asexual reproduction considered good or sometimes bad? Well, asexual reproduction, it can be important or needed in many ways because one, in asexual reproduction, only one plant is required. So you do not need to vary two different plants to create a single plant, a single small plant, a baby plant, a new plant. In asexual reproduction, only one parent is needed, and fusion of gametes is not required. So that means they do not need to fuse reproductive cells together. All of the beneficial qualities are passed on to the offspring. So because it's like asexual reproduction, it's like cloning. You're cloning one plant into another. And because of this, all the good traits, all the beneficial qualities of that plant is passed through the offspring. And this method of producing offspring is faster than sexual reproduction. This entire process of asexual reproduction is actually faster than normal sexual reproduction of plants. And since organisms are already in a suitable habitat, they can colonize the area rapidly. So that means there could be more of the same plants, and they can control a specific area. So what are the disadvantages of asexual reproduction? Well, it says here that there is no genetic variation in the offspring, and hence the species are not well adapted to changes in the environment. Now what this means is that because there's only one parent, the offspring tend to be exactly like the parent. That means that there is exactly the same. They're like clones. And because of this, if the environment were to change or there was a new virus, a new disease amongst the area, they will not be able to survive because they're exactly the same. So the virus could spread very quickly. It could affect one plant and from there on affect many more of these plants because they're exactly the same, and they could not adapt well to changes in the environment. So this is what they mean of asexual reproduction. Now we should be going more in on what are more advantages and disadvantages of asexual reproduction. In the wild, when plants are dispersed into a new habitat, they can rapidly colonize the area. I've explained this. It means that in a new habitat, using the power of asexual reproduction, they could quickly spread, as because they're cloning each other. They do not need, yeah, it's quicker than sexual reproduction, and they do not need reproductive cells to create an offspring. They could easily clone each other using the process of mitosis. So they could rapidly colonize an area if it could. In crop production, several methods are used to propagate plants with desirable qualities. Now, farmers use asexual reproduction to clone plants that have desirable qualities that they need. Let's say a plant has the ability of, it's disease resistant. It has a famous disease, and it could resist the disease. Now, a farmer would obviously use asexual reproduction to clone that plant so that it could be resistant to a specific disease. Now, both types of leaves in the layering involve use of a stem that is still attached to the parent to grow root. So this is considered an advantage. Another type of disadvantage is in the wild and in crop production, it may be a disadvantage to have no genetic variation. This is true because it could be, if a disease were to affect one plant, it could easily affect all the plants in the area. And rapid colonization will lead to overcrowding and competition of light, water, and nutrients. This is also true because when there's too much of the same plant in one specific area, it can become very full, crowded, and populated. So it becomes quite competitive for new offsprings or new smaller plants to try and get light, water, and nutrition, as it will be very difficult for it. Now we've done asexual reproduction, I think it's time we proceed on to sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction is the process of evolving two gametes to form a zygote, and it produces genetically dissimilar offspring. So this sexual reproduction, unlike asexual reproduction, sexual reproduction needs two parents to form a zygote. It needs two parents to form a zygote, and it needs two gametes to form a zygote, and it genetically dissimilar offspring. It uses it to produce an offspring. And unlike asexual reproduction, it needs two parents, and it's quite slow compared to asexual reproduction. And also to note that asexual reproduction does need reproductive cells. It does not use the process of mitosis to produce an offspring. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of sexual reproduction in plants? Well, the advantages is that offspring may inherit beneficial qualities from both parents. Now, in asexual reproduction, a plant could only inherit beneficial qualities from one parent. It's like cloning. But in sexual reproduction, a plant could inherit beneficial qualities from different plants. So let's say one plant was disease resistant and another one was insect resistant, as in it doesn't attract it attracts insect for pollen. Let's say it attracts insect, it has beautiful petals and a nice smell for insects. Now these are two beneficial qualities, and because of sexual reproduction, these qualities could be passed down to the offspring. The offspring can inherit these qualities, making it better compared to the parents. And there is genetic variation in the offspring, so this could lead the plant to better adapt into change of the environment. And because there's two different parents, if there were to be a change in environment, the plant could easily survive because it's not exactly the same like asexual reproduction. Now, what are the disadvantages of sexual reproduction? Well, one is that fusion of gametes is required. That you need to use reproductive cells, and two parents are also required. That means that you cannot clone it. It's not as fast as asexual. You need two different plants to sexually reproduce. But in asexual, you only use one plant. And this method of producing offspring is slower than asexual reproduction. This is true. This method is a bit slower because it requires two parents. Now we go on to more advantages and disadvantages. Advantages of sexual reproduction in crop production. In crop production, plants can be selectively bred to produce offspring with desirable qualities, and these plants may grow and mature faster, which reduces harvesting time for farmers, have resistance to diseases, result in higher yield of crop, and have resistance to unfavorable environmental conditions such as rise in environmental temperature or changes in the soil of pH. So this allows a plant, an offspring, to inherit the parent's desirable qualities. This is known as selective breeding, where the farmer, when the farmer uses selectively breed specific plants to produce an offspring with desirable qualities. Now the disadvantages of sexual reproduction is that due to the genetic variation of some offsprings may be less adapted to changes in the environment. So it's not when you use sexual reproduction, it's not a confirmation. It's not always that the offspring can collect the beneficial qualities from both parents. There is a chance that the offspring may not inherit such qualities, causing it to be less adapted to changes in the environment. So if a plant were to produce two different offspring, one offspring could collect all the beneficial qualities, while another plant of another offspring would just be less adapted. And the reproduction process is slower than asexual reproduction. It also has to depend on external factors such as insects and wind for cross-pollination. So unlike asexual reproduction, asexual reproduction depends on factors that helps with cross-pollination such as insects, wind, water, etc. And there will be wastage of pollen and energy, as pollen grains contain the male gametes that are required for sexual reproduction, and a large amount of pollen needs to be produced to offset the loss of pollen. Now we're going to go on to compare asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. What are the differences? In asexual reproduction, it uses the process of mitosis and does not involve the fusion of gametes. Only one parent is required. Offsprings are genetically identical, like clones, and they are relatively a quicker method. So in asexual reproduction, this involves in the fusion of gametes. In asexual reproduction, this does not involve the fusion of gametes, and only one parent is required. Offsprings are genetically identical, and it's a relatively quicker method. In sexual reproduction, sexual reproduction involves the fusion of a male gamete with a female gamete to form a zygote, and it requires two plants, except for plants with bisexual flowers. Offsprings are genetically different, and it's a much slower method compared to asexual reproduction. Now we'll go on to section 16.2, where we will learn about the parts of flowers and state which function of the parts of an insect pollinated flower. Let's move on. So, what are the reproductive organs of a flowering plant? Flowers bear the reproductive organs of a flowering plant. Flowers bear the reproductive organs or flowering plants, and flowers may occur on plants in a single flower or an inflorescence. So every plant, actually has flowers. It's just different types. Even fruits contain flowers. Now these flowers contain the reproductive organs of a plant. This flowers allows a plant to reproduce, and each different flower has consists of a main organ that helps with sexual reproduction. A complete flower consists of a flower stalk, sepals, petals, stamens, and a carpel. Now, before I go to straight, I need to explain to you what an inflorescence is. An inflorescence is a cluster of flowers born on the same stalk. So, as you can see here, this is the single flower, and an inflorescence is multiple flowers on the same stalk, on the same stalk. Now, if we move on to what is a complete flower, you can see in this diagram that there are many different parts of a flower, and we're going to explain each of what they do and how do they help in sexual reproduction, starting with the petals. Now, petals are modified leaves forming the most obvious part of the flower. They stand out in the part of the plant. It stands out. It's most of the time brightly colored, pretty, and they are quite flat. So because the conditions, these petals attract insects for pollination, and they provide a platform for the insects to land. And they also have lines that guide the insects to the base of the petal, which contains the nectar in some plants. So the petals in most plants are often brightly colored. They are often like in a platform way, like a slant, and this allows insects to softly land and to collect the nectar in plants. Now, what are sepals? Here are sepals. Sepals are modified leaves which enclose and protect the other parts of the flower in the bud stage, and the sepals usually form the outermost layer of floral leaves. So when a flower is formed, you will notice that it has a shape like a cocoon, like a quite mini small circle. These are the sepals, and as the flower blooms, it opens up to its petals. The sepals are now at the utmost layer. They just stay over there and act as a protective layer for the petals. Now we're going to go to the stamen. Now a stamen is in a male flower. This is a organ that are found in male flower. It's part of male part of the flower, and the stamen consists of anther and a filament. This is an anther, and this stem-like is the filament. This entire part, let me highlight. This entire part is the filament, and this small bud is the anther. So what do these filaments and anther do? Well, the filament is the stalk that holds the anther in the stamen. It is also the anther also consists. No, the filament is a stalk that holds the anther in a suitable position to disperse the pollen, and the anther also consists of a vascular bundle. Then this vascular bundle contains a phloem and xylem. So what are phloem and xylem? Well, phloem translocates sucrose and amino acids into the developing anther. So inside this anther, there is a vascular bundle that contains the phloem and xylem, and the phloem translocates nutrients such as sucrose and amino acids into the developing anther, and the sucrose provides energy for cell division, and amino acids are used for synthesis of proteins and a new cytoplasm. Xylem, which is also in the anther, transport water and mineral ions to the anther. So these phloem and xylem are often found in normal stem. They have an important role of allowing nutrients such as sucrose, amino acids, water, and mineral ions to go up to the anther, allowing it to get energy for cell division and to allow them to produce a new cytoplasm. Now the anther consists of two lobes, as you can see in this image. Wait, let me zoom in. In this image, there's two lobes. Each lobe contains two pollen sacs. In each pollen sacs are the pollen grains produced by the anther, and when the anther matures, it splits open to release the pollen grains. So the pollen grains contain the male gametes. Those are what this is what the pollen grain contains. So the anther put the pollen sacs produce pollen grains in the anther, and when the anther becomes old, mature, it splits open. This part splits open, allowing pollen grains to fall off, and allowing the pollen grains to fall off. And the pollen grains are what contain the male gametes of a plant's sexual reproduction system. And a male gamete has half the number of chromosomes as a normal cell. And if the normal cell of a plant has 20 chromosomes, the gametes will have 10 chromosomes. And male gametes are produced by meiosis. Meiosis is literally the opposite of mitosis. Meiosis is a nuclear division whereby the daughter nuclei contain half the number of the chromosomes as the parent nucleus. The number of chromosomes is called the diploid number, and half the normal number of the chromosomes is called the haploid number. For example, if a cell has a diploid number of 20 chromosomes, the daughter nucleus will have a haploid number of 10 chromosomes, and the nuclei in the pollen grains contain a haploid number of chromosomes. Now we'll be going to the carpel. This part, this area. The carpel is considered the female part of the flower, and it consists of an ovary, a style, and stigmas, and also an ovule. So what are these? And what are these? The stigma is a swollen structure at the end of a style, and it receives the pollen grains and the mature stigma then secretes a sugary fluid that stimulates the pollen grains to germinate. So you see this stigma at the top of the female part of the flower, which collects the pollen grain. So you see, for those who don't understand, once the anther matures and releases the pollen grains, the insects come, and the insect comes and collects. They don't necessarily collect, they come and land here, allowing the pollen grains to stick on them. And then when the insect moves into another plant, the stigma collects these pollen grains. The stigma collects these pollen grains from the insect, and the pollen grains consist of the male gametes. So the stigma collects these male gametes, this pollen grain. So once it receives the pollen grains, the mature stigma secretes a sugary fluid that stimulates the pollen grains to germinate. The style. The style is a stalk. You see the style? The style is a stalk that connects the stigma with the ovary. It connects the stigma with the ovary, and it holds the stigma in a suitable position that traps pollen grains. So as insects fly by, the style holds the stigma in such a position in a way so that it could collect all the pollen grains that are stuck in the insect. The ovary. Now the final part of this plant section is the ovary. The ovary consists of one or more ovules. These are the ovules. And within each mature ovule is a female gamete or an egg cell called the ovum. The ovum is produced by meiosis and is therefore haploid. Now let's go on. Oh my. we have some parts here, but I've already explained this. What is the stamen? The stamen is the male part of a flower, and a carpel is a female part of the flower. Now we'll be going to section 16.3, pollination. We have all heard about it, but do you know the process of pollination? How does it work, and what happens during pollination? So pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from an anther to a stigma. Remember the anther in the let me show you. Remember the anther in the female part, in the anther in the male part of the flower. This is the anther. Pollination is the process of the transfer of pollen grains from the anther all the way to the stigma. And in order for flowering plants to be reproduced sexually, the pollen grains must be transferred from the anthers all the way to the stigma. So this process pollination, this allows the male and female gametes to be brought together later. Now there are two types of pollination: cross-pollination and self-pollination. We'll learn about each of them now. What is self-pollination? Self-pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of the same flower. So let's say a flower here has the anther and the filament, and another flower, the same type of flower, same variant, but at this time it has the stigma and ovary. The self-pollination is the process of moving the pollen grains of an anther to a stigma using the same variation of plants, using the same flower. Different flower, but same flower of a different flower, means same types of flower but different flowers. So features of favoring self-pollination. Flowers are bisexual with anthers and stigmas maturing at the same time. The stigma is situated directly below the anthers. Yes, the flowers are on different flowers on the same plant. The stigma is situated directly below the anthers, and in certain plants, some bisexual flowers never open, and only self-pollination can occur. So the advantages of self-pollination. Well, self-pollination is kind of like asexual reproduction because only one parent plant is required. This can be considered of asexual reproduction. The offspring inherits its genes from the parent plants, and hence beneficial qualities are more likely to be passed on to the offspring. It does not depend on external factors such as insect, winds, or pollination, and since the anthers are close to the stigma of the same flower, there is a higher probability that pollination will occur as compared with cross-pollination. Less pollen and energy is wasted in the self-pollination as the cross-pollination. Now, the disadvantages are less genetic variation in the offspring as compared with cross-pollination. The probability of harmful recessive alleles being expressed in the offspring is higher as compared with cross-pollination. Continued self-pollination may lead to the offspring becoming weaker, smaller, and less resistant to disease. So self-pollination could be explained like asexual, as all these factors are also considered in the asexual reproduction, where one plant is required, less genetic variation, and probability of harmful recessive alleles are being expressed in the offspring. So now we're going to cross-pollination. Cross-pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from one plant of the stigma of a flower of another plant of the same species. Now these are the same species, but they're in this time in different plants. This is plant A with its flower, and this is plant B with its own flower too. Now, cross-pollination. In self-pollination, the flower was in the same plant. The flower was in this plant. They would do pollination in the same plant. But in cross-pollination, plant B is in a flower. This flower is in plant B, which is a different plant. Now, what are the features of cross-pollination? In many plants with bisexual flowers, the anthers and stigmas may mature at different times. The stigmas of plants with bisexual flowers may be situated some distance away from the anthers so that self-pollination is unlikely to occur. So there's some distance between the flowers so that the self-pollination will be unlikely to occur. And in many plants, uh, in many plants, the bisexual flowers, the anthers and stigmas may mature at different times. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of cross-pollination? Well, in cross-pollination, the offspring produced may inherit beneficial qualities from both parents. That means two parents are required. More varieties of offspring can be produced. That is, there is greater genetic variation, which is gene combination from the two parents. There is an increased probability of the offspring being heterozygous. That means have two different zygotes, and more variable seeds are produced, such as seeds are capable of surviving longer before germination. Now, what are the disadvantages? Well, in cross-pollination, two parent plants are required, and that it depends on external factors such as insect, wind, or pollination. Due to the fact that the plants are very far apart, without wind, insects, or other external factors, pollination cannot occur between these two plants because of their far away, unlike self-pollination, where the flower is quite close. The flower is quite close to the other flower because they're in the same plant. And since the pollen grains have to be transferred from one plant to the stigma of another plant, there is a lower probability that pollination will occur as compared with self-pollination, and more energy and pollen are wasted compared to as with self-pollination. Now, this factor is true, and because due to the distance apart, as the bee is traveling with the pollen, carrying the pollen, some pollen falls off the bee. This is therefore wasting energy and pollen. So let's move on to explain the structural adaptation of insect-pollinated flower. Insect-pollinated flower produce smaller amounts of larger, heavier pollen grains that often contain spikes or hooks. Example of a flower is Slitoria. Slitoria is a type of flower that is insect pollinated. Insect pollinated have main factors about them. Number one, they have attractive petals. Their petals are, let me type it now. They have brightly colored petals. That is one thing about insect pollinated flowers. Their petals are very brightly colored to attract the insects. And the sepals of their flowers are stronger. So because when the insect lands on a, let me write that down, sepals are stronger as to compare with other types of pollinated flowers. And this is because when an insect lands on a petal, the sepals must be strong enough to withstand the insect's weight, or else the structure of the plant can get destroyed. Another thing is the petals that they have are nectar guides. In the petals, let me draw. In the petals, often shaped like this, there tends to be lines in the petals, shades of line. These lines are considered nectar guide. They guide the insect to show where exactly the nectar is. They guide the insect to the center of the plant to show where the nectar is so that it can collect the pollen, the nectar in the plants. These lines are considered nectar guide. Wing petals. Petals are enclosed by standard. Wing petals are enclosed by standard petals, and keel petals are enclosed by wing petals. The keel petals enclose the reproductive organs. So there are two petals, which are wings and keel petals. Now these petals are in charge of protecting the reproductive organs of a insect pollinated plant. Okay, so here's the diagram of an insect pollinated plant. They have, this is the stamen and this is the carpel. As you know, yeah, the carpel is the female and the stamen is the male. Now as you can see, here's the ancestor and here is the stigma. No, stigma. And in the female carpel, which is considered the carpel of the flower, it contains the style, stigma, ovule, and ovary. Now, the anther produces pollen grains, which consist of the male gametes, while the ovule produces ovary, which contains the female gametes. So when the anther produces pollen grains and it's transferred to the insect, the pollen grains are then converted into a sugary, converted into a sugary liquid, which is moves down to the ovary. It goes to the ovary through the style. Now here are more features of the insect pollinated flower. As I said, there's the sepal, here's the brightly colored petal, and here are the stamen, anther, filament, stigma, ovary, ovule, nectar, and sepal. Now each of them, as I've already explained, has functions that help with pollination through insects. When the insect carries the pollen from the anther all the way to the stigma, it converts the pollen grains into a sugary paste that allows the male gametes to reach the female gametes, producing a zygote. Now here's some let's investigate. The features of a Slictoria flower are adapted by pollinations by insects, e.g. the flower has both male and female parts, anther and stigma. The anther contains the pollen grains. The structure of the Slictoria pollen grains is adapted to stick onto insects post-pollination. Pollination of Slictoria. There's no image. So the structure of Slictoria pollen grains is adapted to stick into the insect for pollination. Yes. So as I just explained, the structure of the flower, the structure of the flower allows the insect to take the pollen grains and carry it all the way to the stigma of the female part of the plant. And this process is considered pollination, allowing the male gametes to reach the female gametes to produce a zygote. So let's move on now that we've understand this part. Structural adaptation for wind pollinated flowers. Have you guys ever seen a dandelion? Yes, a dandelion. This is a dandelion. You don't realize it, but when a dandelion it flies away with the wind, when you blow it and the dandelion takes these to fly away, it's actually a process of pollination. So let's understand the structure adaptations of a wind pollinated flower. Grasses are a good example of a wind pollinated flowers. Grasses are usually small. They are grouped in inflorescences, which are dull colored, scentless, and without nectar. So unlike insect pollinated flowers, wind pollinated flowers don't have bright colored petals and they don't have an attractive smell to attract the insects. In fact, they're actually quite scentless, dull, and without nectar. Grass flowers are usually enclosed and protected by a leaf-like structure called bract or scales. Now, wind-pollinated flowers produce large amounts or small amounts of lightweight pollen grains. As you can see in this structure, here, as you can see in the structure, it has the pair, one which is the pair of flowers, two which is the upper flower, the lower, the three which is the lower flower, and the spikelet. Spikelet, which is number for this entire section, is spikelet. So what are the pair of flowers? The flowers occur in pair. Each flower is enclosed by two transparent flowing bracts, and the upper flower bisexual. The upper flower is bisexual and consists of an ovary with two long feathery stigmas, three stamens, and two tiny structures called lodicules at the base of the ovary. When this plant is ready to reproduce, the idoscles swell and force the two flowering bracts slightly apart, and in this way the stigmas and anthers can emerge. And three, the lower flower. The lower flower is unisexual. It consists of three stamens with long filaments and two idicles, and therefore it is a male flower. And finally, the spikelet in its higher section. The spikelet is each pair of flower together with a short stalk forms a spikelet, and at the base of each spikelet is a pair of empty or non-flowering bracts. They protect the two flowers in the spikelets. So now we're going to go into the next section, which is the structural adaptation of wind pollination. So how does wind pollination occur? Well, here is wind pollination. You can see here is the upper part, right? Yeah, the upper part of the flower. In wind pollinated flower, as you can see in this diagram, we have the stamen, stigma, and filaments. This mode makes it bisexual because it consists of both male and female structures, making it bisexual. The petals are dull and often green or brown in color. The scent are absent because it's not trying to waste energy by producing scents to attract insects, unlike insect pollinated flowers. The number of pollen grains are in large amounts, and most pollen grains are not transferred to another flower, so therefore the more produced, the better the chance of successful pollination occurring. So unlike insect pollination, they are not transferring the pollination to another flower. It's produced in it's produced in larger amounts of pollen grains, allowing the pollen to have a higher chance of pollination. So let's investigate 16.b. They say you should investigate the features of this plant. I'm not pronouncing this. You can investigate the features of it and how it's adapted for wind pollination. Now you can do a research. You can pause this video and do a quick mini research of the difference between wind pollinated and insect pollinated plants. But I'm going to explain this to you right now. But quickly, I have to explain the pollination of this plant. The mature stamens have long filaments that hang downwards and can swing freely, like a pendule. Like when it has a long filament that hangs downwards. So it hangs downward like this. This allows it to swing freely. And when the filaments sway in the wind, the dust-like pollen is shaken free and dispersed by the wind. The mature stigmas do not hang freely but project out of the bracts, allowing wind pollination. So what are the differences, as I said, that we'll do? What are the differences between insect pollinated and wind pollinated flowers? Well, insect pollinated flowers, the flowers are usually brightly colored petals to attract insects, and they also produce scent. And nectar is present, and the flowers are fragrant or sweet smelling. You know those perfumes you see? They are actually made with insect pollinated flowers. Because these flowers are fragrant and sweet smelling, people use these type of flowers to create perfumes. Nectar is present, and they are usually brightly colored petals to attract insects. However, in wind pollinated, flowers are usually small and dull colored without petals, and nectar is not needed as the insect does not come. The insect does not come, so they do not need to use nectar. The nectar is something like a sweet substance for insects to lick or eat, and let some of them pollen grains be stuck in their body. But without the nectar, without insect, there is no need for nectar to produce. And the flowers in wind pollinated are odorless. They don't have a smell at all. They smell scentless. They have no smell. Now that we've know the difference, we're going to more detailed differences. Excuse me. The stigmas in insect pollinated are usually small and compact and do not protrude out of the flower, whereas in wind pollinated, the stigmas, the stigmas are large and feathery and usually protrude out of the flower to produce a large surface area to trap pollen. Stamens are not pendulous, and usually do not protrude out of the flower, but in wind pollinated, the stamens are long, pendulous filaments producing anthers. Pollen grains are easily shaken out of the anthers because of the wind. Pollen is fairly abundant in insect pollinated flowers, and that is because the pollen grains are usually larger with rough surface so that they can readily cling into the body of the insect. But in wind pollinated, pollen is more abundant. Pollen grains have smooth surface and are tiny and light so that they are easily blown out by the wind. In insect pollinated, nectar guide may be presented on petals to guide the insect towards the nectar, whereas the nectar guide is absent in wind pollinated flowers. Now we'll go to the final section, if I'm not mistaken, of the and this is considered the fertilization in the plants. So, if let's move on, how does fertilization take place? Now, fertilization is the production is how plants produce their offspring or the zygotes. Now, after pollinization, the pollen grain comes in contact with the stigma, which is the female part. This pollen grain then germinates in response to the sugary fluid secreted by the mature stigma. A pollen tube grows out of each of the pollen grain. Here's the pollen tube. Now the pollen tube grows out each of the pollen grain, and the male gamete enters the pollen tube. As the pollen tube grows, it secretes the enzymes to digest the surrounding tissues of the stigma and style. Thus, the pollen tube grows down the style into the ovary. The pollen tube enters the ovule through an opening in the ovule wall called the microphyll, and within the ovule, the stem of the pollen tube absorbs saps and bursts, releasing the male gamete. And as it arrives here you could see the microphyll. The microphyll is an opening of the ovule wall. Here is the ovule wall, and inside is the ovum, which is called egg. And within the ovule wall, the tip of the pollen tube absorbs the saps and bursts, releasing the male gametes. So as it hits here, it absorbs the saps and bursts, releasing millions of male gametes. Actually, not millions, not really millions. The nucleus of the male gamete fuses with the nucleus of the ovum to form the zygote, and this entire process is considered fertilization. Fertilization is the fusion of the nucleus of the male gamete with the nucleus of the female gamete to form a zygote. Fertilization, as I explained, is the profusion of the nucleus of the male gamete with the nucleus of the female gamete to form a zygote. After fertilization, the ovary becomes the fruit, the ovule becomes the seed, and the zygote becomes the embryo. The embryo consists of the embryonic shoot, the embryonic root, and the cotyledons. The petal, style, and stigma and anthers wither off and drop. Now here are more investigates the conditions necessary for a seed to germinate. Here you can see there's 3 jars. Jar 1 and 3. Jar 1 consists of gas, jar 2 consists of water, and jar 3 is placed in a refrigerator. It consists of a damp cotton wheel, but it's put in a refrigerator, which is a cool place. Now, in jar 1 and jar 3, no germination takes place. In only jar 2, the seeds have germinated. So that means a water and a suitable temperature are required for germination. The seeds could be placed in an uncovered container where they are exposed to surroundings, and no germination takes place where there is no oxygen. Oxygen is required for germination. So what are the conditions necessary for seeds to germinate? Oxygen, a suitable temperature, and water. Without these, a seed cannot germinate. So here are some less practice questions for you students to solve. Why can a self-pollination occur in cytoria plants, and why is cross-pollination advantageous to plants? List the ways in which cross-pollination may be assured. So please pause this video and answer these questions, as it will help you when you're studying for your IGCSEs. Now, we have arrived at the end of the video and at the end of the class. Thank you so much for watching this video. Here you can draw your mind map. You can draw it in your notebook or in a A4 paper of what you've learned in this video. And if you enjoyed it, please hit the like button and subscribe. And thank you so much for watching this video. Until next time.